Performance to your old
components that can pass these signals. Head to KATU.com for more information.
News to go weekdays on K2 News this morning.
This is K2 on your side.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. Harsh charges from the Speaker.
We were told that waterboarding was not being used. The CIA was misleading the Congress.
Course corrections from the President.
I fear the publication of these photos may only have a chilling effect on future investigations of detainee abuse.
And a PR blitz from the former VP.
We'd successfully defended the nation for 7.5 years. I believe it was possible because of the policies we had in place.
Is Cheney right? Is Pelosi in trouble? Are Obama's choices making us more safe? That debate this morning with two key senators, Republican Whip Jon Kyl and Democrat Jim Webb. Plus an expanded powerhouse roundtable with George Will, Democratic strategist James Carville, John McCain's campaign manager Steve Schmidt, Katrina vanden Heuvel of The Nation, and the former State Department official now joining her father on the front lines, Liz Cheney. And, as always, the Sunday Funnies.
She spends 8 years telling everybody how dumb President Bush is, and the minute they're in trouble, he fooled me!
From the heart of the nation's capital, this week, with ABC News Chief Washington Correspondent George Stephanopoulos, live from the Newseum on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Hello again. It has been a week full of accusations, confrontation, recalibration, and new calls for investigation here in Washington. Just another week. And with apologies for that burst of rhyme, let me welcome our headliners to this morning's debate, Democratic Senator Jim Webb of Virginia and the Senate's Republican Whip, Jon Kyl of Arizona. Gentlemen, welcome to you both.
Thank you.
And there is so much to talk about this week, but let's start with that war of words between Speaker Pelosi and the CIA. She says the CIA lied about these 2002 briefings. Leon Panetta came out on Friday, said, no, they told the truth. And former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, has weighed in saying that this is despicable behavior. Take a look.
I think she has lied to the House, and I think that the House has an absolute obligation to open an inquiry, and I hope there will be a resolution to investigate her, and I think this is a big deal. I don't think the Speaker of the House can lie to the country on national security matters.
Senator Kyl, how big a deal is this, and how should it be investigated?
Well, it is a big deal, obviously. She is the Speaker, and at that time, she was the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, and she was one of 4 people who got the briefings. And it's pretty clear that Leon Panetta, her former colleague in the House from California, now CIA director, totally disagrees with her recollection of events. Let's give her the benefit of the doubt and say she doesn't remember, although that's a pretty important thing not to remember accurately.
So does it need to be investigated?
I am less interested in investigating whether her memory was correct or she lied about it than I am in the policies that flow from the debate that we're having. I am not one who thinks we'd ought to have truth commissions and all the rest of it and keep looking backward. I agree with the President. We've got enough on our plate. We need to look forward.
That's the irony here, Senator Webb. Speaker Gingrich says investigate. He wants a separate House investigation. Speaker Pelosi says fine, let's have a truth commission, the one that Senator Kyl doesn't want. Where do you stand on this?
I just don't think it's that big a deal. I mean, I think we have
only the CIA
selective memories.
Well,
I mean, they're going to have a fight, but in terms of where the country is right now, where we need to go, there are a lot of issues of accountability in terms of looking back as to the conduct of the past administration in a number of areas, but really in terms of what we need to be focusing on. Let's accept that torture is inappropriate behavior. I mean, I've interrogated hundreds of detainees and enemy combatants when I was a Marine in Vietnam. Torture doesn't work. Let's all accept that, separate it from these other issues that we're talking about in terms of having to resolve issues like Guantanamo and move forward.
So no truth commission?
I think this will resolve itself without something like that.
Let's move on to some of the other issues, because President Obama this week did make 2 significant shifts on national security policy. He said that the photos of that detainee abuse would not be released. He would fight that in court. And he also shifted on the issue of military tribunals. Even though he had been for them in the past, he heavily criticized the Bush tribunals. Now he's bringing them back with some reforms. And let me show you some of the human rights groups' reaction to these moves by President Obama. The ACLU says these military commissions are inherently illegitimate, unconstitutional, and incapable of delivering outcomes we can trust. Human Rights Watch. By resurrecting this failed Bush administration idea, President Obama is backtracking dangerously on his reform agenda. Human rights first, reinventing commissions so deeply associated with Guantanamo Bay will merely add to the erosion of international confidence in American justice and provide more fodder for America's enemies. Now, you were also against the commissions during your campaign. Do you support what the president's doing here?
I wasn't against the commissions per se. I think that my view on...
no, well, let me just interrupt you there, because I have an AP story from April 2007 where you said, it says that you told reporters that the detainees should either be declared prisoners of war or charged in the American judicial system. We can't just continue to hold people in limbo without charges for this period of time and still call ourselves Americans.
If I said charged in the American judicial system, I would mean under the traditions of the rules of evidence and these sorts of things. But my view has always been that we need to move these people forward. We need to find those people who should be held accountable and hold them accountable, and people who have been held inappropriately should be released. But I don't believe that the situation with people in Guantanamo, as opposed to others who have conducted activities in the United States, are the same. I think that the people who've been held in Guantanamo are being charged essentially for acts of international terror, for acts of war, and they don't belong in our judicial system. They don't belong in our jails.
So you support the commissions?
I do. But with this caveat, we need commissions like this because there are issues of evidence that you cannot take care of inside the regular American court system. Classified information that might have an impact on how we collect intelligence and those sorts of things. And there are facilities built in Guantanamo right now that are able to do that.
Agreement here?
Yeah, I agree. There are some people that you try, very few, some more that you try in the military commissions, and we've always had military commissions of one kind or another. Some that you can't, because of the evidence and other factors, try, and if they are the equivalent of prisoners of war, in this case enemy combatants, you can hold them until the end of the war that you're in. And then, of course, there are those who, on an annual review, you decide can be released. Unfortunately, a lot of those that we've released, because we thought they no longer posed a danger, have come back to the battlefield and have fought us. But the president has made some changes in the military commissions to give these people some additional rights, and perhaps that helps to balance the situation. Congress, after all, passed the Military Commissions Act. This would liberalize it to some extent. We'll have to wait and see whether it liberalizes it so much that they don't work anymore, but I'm happy to see how they work.
You laid out nicely the various groups of detainees that the president has to deal with, which of course brings us to the question of what to do with those detainees once Guantanamo is closed, as the president has called for. I know this is creating a lot of controversy in the Senate because of the possibility that some of these detainees may have to come to the United States. And the Attorney General, Eric Holder, was asked about this at the Senate this week, and he said very clearly that no dangerous detainees will be released into the United States.
I don't know, whatever quantum of proof, however you want to describe it, to believe that a person posed a danger to the United States. We will do all that we can to ensure that that person remains detained and does not become a danger to the American people.
Is that enough assurance for you, Senator Kyl?
Well, understand that we've already released those who, after careful examination, we thought didn't pose a danger. And the number is somewhere between 30 and 60 who turned out to continue to conduct their activities against us after they were released. The remaining 240 or so do pose a danger. So there aren't any left that can easily be released because they don't pose a danger.
Well, that's not exactly true, right? And I want to bring Senator Webb in on this because I know there are about 17, I believe, Chinese Uyghurs, they're called, who've been ordered released by a federal court. They've been determined not to be a threat to the United States. And the administration has been working on plans to bring them to Virginia. Can you accept them in your state?
Well, let me back up a minute. The answer is no.
No.
No. And let me explain why. But to back it up, the numbers that we've seen in my office are about 800 people have gone through Guantanamo. The majority of those who have been released, we're down to 220 to 240 somewhere. The majority of those that have been released to third countries, not actually released out into open, you know, to where
just
they
let
can,
out the door,
yeah,
right?
Right. So we don't know really where they have gone. This other group deserves due process. They deserve, in the right kind of environment, and I support what the president is doing on the military commissions, to have their cases examined to see whether or not they should continue to be detained. The situation with the Chinese Uyghurs that you're talking about, on the one hand, it can be argued that they were simply conducting dissident activities against the government of China. On the other, they accepted training from Al-Qaeda, and as a result, they have taken part in terrorism. I don't believe that should come to the United States.
Not to the United States and not Virginia.
No, I don't believe it. So.
No, I totally agree.
How about this? There's also the group that might have to be brought to the United States for trial or to be detained here, and Republicans in the Senate have put out legislation, now introduced legislation, that says no detainee should be brought to the United States in any way unless the state legislature and the governor of the state signs off on that. One, do you have the votes to pass it? And two, will you block any funding for the closing of Guantanamo without those assurances?
That was a motion by House Republicans. We're taking up the bill next week. There will be an amendment that would preclude, it would be similar to that, but perhaps not identical. A similar resolution passed a couple of years ago, 93-4, saying don't bring these detainees to the United States. And my guess is that none of this supplemental funding will be allowed to relocate detainees into the United States, that amendment will be adopted.
Will you support that? Because you support...
We spend hundreds of millions of dollars building an appropriate facility with all security precautions in Guantanamo to try these cases. They are cases against international law. These aren't people who were in the United States committing a crime in the United States. These are people who were brought to Guantanamo for international terrorism. I do not believe they should be tried in the United States.
Yeah, back in January, you supported the president's decision to close Guantanamo.
I think Guantanamo has become the great Rorschach test of how we feel about international terrorism. We should, at the right time, close Guantanamo, but I don't think that it should be closed in terms of transferring people here.
Well, but I just want to press this one more time, because actually in January, on January 23rd, you said the president has given a reasonable timeline here in sorting this out. You no longer believe it's reasonable?
No, well, no, I don't, actually. You know, having sat down with my staff and gone through the numbers in detail and looking at you know, the facilities that have been built there, and coming to the point where I have to, you know, personally weigh in on this in a detailed way, I think what we're doing is the right way.
So you will not support funding for closing down Guantanamo?
We should close down Guantanamo at the right time. I think what's happened is Guantanamo has become the issue rather than how we process these people who are detained there. Let's process them with the right rules of law, the right due process, within the constraints of how we have to handle these cases with military intelligence and that sort of thing. But the facility is there at Guantanamo to do it, and then close it down.
So the January deadline should be relaxed. The president should not meet that January deadline. You don't believe
I think we should, you know, I think we should defer to the judgment of the administration who is looking at this. I think we all are moving toward the right direction, but we shouldn't be creating artificial timelines.
But the administration has said January.
They've said a lot of things and taken a look and said some other things. So let's process these people in a very careful way and then take care of it.
Let me come back to you, Senator Kyl. Yesterday, President Obama appointed the Republican governor of Utah, Jon Huntsman, to be ambassador of China. High profile governor. He had been looking at a presidential run. Are you disappointed that he took this job?
No. He's a very capable guy. He speaks Mandarin Chinese. He had a post in Singapore similar to this in the past. He's very experienced. He's knowledgeable about trade issues. And I think it's great to have a highly qualified person like that, and the fact that the president reached out to appoint a Republican is a good thing. I'm not at all disappointed. It's, I think, good for the United States.
I'm chairman of the East Asia Subcommittee on the Foreign Relations Committee. I'm happy to take a look at his qualifications.
Senator Webb, Senator Kyl, thank you both very much for your time this morning. Straight to the roundtable now. So as our panelists take their seats, take a look at Robert Gibbs from Friday's press briefing, showing just a little bit of exasperation after a week of taking a lot of heat from both sides.
Good. You started out on Monday wondering why we were being so opposite of George Bush in all of these questions. And on Friday, I'm answering questions about why are we so much like George Bush on all these questions. I'll let you guys discern. what inflection point, what period of day that all changed.
Well, we'll let the roundtable discern what period of day that all changed. Let me bring them all in here right now. I've got George Will, as always, former State Department official Liz Cheney, Steve Schmidt, John McCain's former campaign manager, James Carville, Democratic strategist, also the author of 40 More Years, How the Democrats Will Rule the Next Generation, making George Will laugh, and Katrina Vanden Heuvel of The Nation magazine. And George, let's begin with these decisions that President Obama made this week. He decided not to allow the release of these photos of detainee abuse. He decided to reinstitute military commissions. You saw there a lot of human rights groups upset. Jim Webb, apparently not all that upset as a Democrat. How significant are these shifts, and are they the right moves?
Well, they come after he essentially affirmed warrantless wiretapping, and he escalated in Afghanistan. So you can see why a certain faction of the Democratic Party is unhappy. On the other hand, he has changed his mind on the photographs, but he has changed his mind by keeping a promise. The promise he made during the campaign was, I will always consult with my commanders. He consulted with the commanders, who said, among other things, that 10 days after the Abu Ghraib photos were released, there was a spike of violence in Iraq. They strongly urged him not to release these, and he won't. Now, there's a court involved in this, and the court has so far said that under the Freedom of Information Act, they have to be released. He can appeal that, he can lose, and he can then say, I did my best and the photos come out.
Is that good enough?
You know, Obama was elected in part to correct the illegal, shameful policies of these last 8 years. I'm interested in the military commission's decision because he sided...
Do you support him on the photos?
I don't, and I think they will come out, and I think Obama could have set a clean break by saying we will never allow these policies to happen again. They should be released to a commission. That's what I think he should have said if he wanted to elide the full disclosure. But on the military commissions, he sided with the military over his Justice Department, which weighed in and said that the federal courts have a long and good tradition of safeguarding the government's national legitimate interests, as well as safeguarding intelligence information and the due process of suspects. I think that it was a mistake, and I think what he's done, President Obama, is made it harder for some of his supporters to support him, and he will need them. He will need them in the fights ahead. And he can't, my final point is he cannot evade any longer the need for full, true transparency and accountability. The momentum for a commission, a nonpartisan independent commission, is so powerful at this stage.
I'm not sure that's true. If you heard those senators today, they weren't for it.
We're not just inside the Beltway, George. I think there is interest in this country as more and more comes out if he's going to pursue what he wants to pursue in terms of his agenda.
Well, I would imagine, listening to Katrina, that you would agree then that the president ought to declassify the memos the vice president's asked for so the American people can actually see the effectiveness of this program. And I think the president deserves some credit for coming to the right place on military commissions and on the photos. But I do think it gives the American people some pause to sort of have watched the stops and starts here. You know, the president on Guantanamo, second day in office, announces it's going to be closed before I think he had a real understanding and a handle on what the alternatives would be and how difficult it would be. And with the pictures, I think also you saw again, you know, an announcement that they would be released and then having to walk that back, and even an admission, frankly, that he hadn't looked at the pictures before he announced they'd be released. And I think, you know, on issues that have to do with national security and war and peace, the American people would like to see a little bit more consistency in terms of their commander-in-chief.
James, the White House is obviously sensitive to this charge on flip-flopping, but does it matter if you end up in a place where you're going to get a lot of support?
Look, first of all, if you say that my general said that I shouldn't release this, and, you know, cause a spike, and the president says, okay, I won't release it. I mean, I think that, as George pointed out, that was something that he said during the campaign. We would be awfully uncomfortable as Democrats if he were releasing these pictures tomorrow, and it was these things that General Petraeus, the Secretary Gates, the new commander coming in Afghanistan, I think General McChrystal, would have said, let's don't do this. So let me tell you, as a Democrat, I'm very happy that he decided to listen to what his commander says. And it may very well be that as it winds its way through the courts will release them anyway, which I don't know.
That may be, and maybe part of the calculation is that they are going to come out eventually, but we're at a critical time in Iraq now as troops are moving out of the cities. We're heading towards elections in Afghanistan. The timing here did matter.
Right, it did. And again, you would not want to be a president and have the Secretary of Defense and your top commanders come back and say, we advised against doing this. That would make me uncomfortable, and I'm a pretty good Democrat.
But they advised against, those same people advised against doing it before the White House publicly announced they would release the photos. So it's a little disingenuous to say, he made the decision based on what the military commanders were saying.
But it's also buying the military argument.
You can't ignore the political pressure.
It's buying the military argument that the release of these photos will increase violence. These photos, Guantanamo, Bagram, that has been the cause for anti-Americanism, and our actions, our policies in escalating in Afghanistan.
I agree with you. We became infatuated with torture. We should have never done that. However, given the reason that you have these photographs is because they exist. Having said all of that, if these generals come in and you're the president, and they said you shouldn't do it right now, I don't envy the decision, but I'm more comfortable as a Democrat with him making this decision than another decision.
Steve, he's also facing, you saw it with the senators as well today, some more controversy over Guantanamo. And this looks like the next big political controversy that's going to be coming down the pike for the president. He said he wants Guantanamo to close. Democrats in the House say they're not going to fund it, and now it appears the Democrats in the Senate are going to say exactly the same thing. And what you've got above all is a huge consensus developing in the Senate that no one wants a detainee in their own state.
Well, there are a lot of very dangerous people committed to kill Americans that are housed at Guantanamo Bay. It was a very irresponsible decision to announce the closing of Guantanamo Bay prison before he had any idea where the detainees there were going to go. The decision he made this week was the right decision. Katrina said he bought the military story. When an American military commander says you're going to get soldiers killed if you release these photos, Commander-in-Chief made the prudent decision. He made the right decision. He deserves credit for it here. More and more, though, you see over this course of his young presidency, him adopting policies that he criticized on the campaign, because now he's in the real world. He is leading our country, and we are a nation at war. And he is making decisions, thankfully, that are responsible with regard to the security of the country and the lives of our men and women in combat.
One of the things we see is the president is pretty unsentimental about it. He's showing unsentimentality. He's also showing great flexibility, which is useful in a president. But he is getting criticism on this Guantanamo issue for not giving his own party cover. I mean, he's got his Secretary of Defense saying we're going to have to bring some of them into the States. He's got his Attorney General saying we're not going to let any dangerous people into the States, but we might have to allow some detainees here, yet he's been relatively silent.
Well, the Supermax prisons in our country are full of Americans who have killed Americans and are perfectly safe. So the idea that we can't find a place to house these very few people who are really dangerous strikes me as preposterous. And I don't think the country minds it when a president changes his mind. It indicates that he's looking at the evidence. What is it?
I agree with George on the Supermax. Let me just finish. I agree with George on the Supermax. But you said, George, that the next big controversy is Guantanamo. The next big controversy is the mounting evidence showing that torture was used to extract evidence to create a link, a false link, between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. That is a crucial area of investigation.
Let me try to give a little more context here, and then let Liz respond. Well, let me just explain to the viewers what Katrina, a little more context on what she's talking about. There were some reports this week that the Vice President's office, actually, back in 2003, in April of 2003, I believe, sent some sort of word to Iraq that a detainee in custody should be waterboarded in order to get information to establish whether there was a connection between Iraq and Al-Qaeda or more information on weapons of mass destruction. Your response?
Well, two things. It's easy to sit here inside the Beltway and say, gosh, no problem to put terrorists in Colorado. And I think, frankly, the people in Colorado would have something to say to that, to object. On this particular allegation, nobody who's talking about this in the press has any knowledge of specific detainee treatment. And you saw the CIA yesterday come out and say, absolutely, unequivocally, waterboarding was not used to establish this kind of a link.
I have not
seen it. Well, you should read it.
There was
post
Walter
yesterday.
Pinkett. But I want to press one thing there, because there was a report. No, but you've explained one part of it. I just want to ask you to explain another part of it. The report, though, that the Vice President's office did ask specifically to have information about Iraq Al-Qaeda connections presented to this detainee. Do you deny that?
I think that it's important for us to have all the facts out. And the first and most important fact is that the Vice President has been absolutely clear that he supported this program. This was an important program. It saved American lives. Now, the way this policy worked internally was once the policy was determined and decided, the CIA, made the judgments about how each individual detainee would be treated. And the Vice President would not substitute his own judgment for the professional judgment of the CIA.
Either?
So I think it's very important for us to look at exactly what the facts are. And the facts are that 3 people were waterboarded. The people that are, claims to be waterboarded in these articles are not any of those people. And I think, frankly, you've also got to look at the source of some of these allegations. And one of the big sources is, Colonel Wilkerson. Now, Colonel Wilkerson gets coverage because of his associations with General Powell.
Former Chief of Staff.
Has made a cottage industry out of, fantasies about the Vice President.
Well, he's not the only one
office.
reporting it, but it's good to get your answer. We're going to have to take a break right now. This roundtable is going to continue after the break. The Pelosi CIA showdown. Who will win and how much trouble is the Speaker in?
This Week with George Stephanopoulos, brought to you by Microsoft and Verizon.
So do you guys actually walk the walk when it comes to communications technology?
Absolutely. I think you can save both a lot of money but a lot of people's time if you choose the right technology for the right place. And we think we save tens of millions of pounds a year.
Wow, that's a big number.
It's a very big number. So if you can do something that's good for the company and good for your shareholders at the same time, then it's pretty much a no-brainer.
At Verizon Wireless, we understand that training and teamwork are what move our people forward.
Like the training that lets me help customers with new wireless innovations.
And to help us reach our goals, nothing succeeds like the power of teamwork.
Training and teamwork to make jobs into careers.
At Verizon Wireless, we're learning and working together, so we work better for our customers.
We have recycling plans that fit the biggest companies and programs that help others get started. We're there for you every night and on the job with you every day. When you put waste management to work, you get an environmental partner. And big ideas for every size business. From everyday collection to environmental protection. Think green. Think waste management.
I'm Nelson, and this is my Citgo. Salisbury is a wonderful little town. It's the kind of place where folks ask how you're doing and are really interested in the answer. As a local business, we're proud of the jobs we provide in this community, and we're especially proud of the ways that we give back and the local causes we support.
Every Citgo is locally owned, and they're at every turn.
We treat our customers like friends, and who doesn't want more friends?
At eHarmony, we think there's a better way for singles to find lasting relationships. While other sites make you scan through thousands of pictures to find a match, eHarmony pre-screens each member for you to determine your matches based on 29 dimensions of deep compatibility in areas like character, values, and intellect. Feel the difference yourself of being matched on deep compatibility. Get started today and review all your matches for free at eHarmony.com.
Millions of workers across America are on the path that helps guide them step by step toward a rock-solid retirement. It starts right at work with a retirement plan managed by one of America's most trusted names, Prudential. Find your path. Let Prudential be your rock for retirement.
Driving 180 miles per hour, I have to really trust my car. The same goes for my allergy medicine. I only use non-drowsy Claritin. Claritin relieves my worst symptoms, and it's proven to keep me as alert and focused as someone without allergies. I'm Carl Edwards, and I only live Claritin Clear.
We'll be right back with the Roundtable and the Sunday Funnies.
This week with George Stephanopoulos from the Newseum in Washington, D.C. We'll continue in a moment after this from our ABC stations.
It sounds so outrageous. Ultimate Fighting Clubs in high school?
This is a blood choke.
It's violent, ferocious. No parent or teacher would ever allow this, right? Well, get ready for the ultimate surprise on World News with Charles Gibson, Monday.
The Indianapolis race is on. Here they come. Just look at those boys drive. Unbelievable! The checkered flag is out. Who's going to win?
The Indianapolis 500 returns Sunday, May 24th on ABC.
Here at Wilsonville Toyota, we understand accomplishment. Accomplishment can be the desire to never give up. Accomplishment means going that extra mile. Accomplishment can also mean understanding your obstacles. Come visit Wilsonville Toyota, Portland's only winner of the 2008 Toyota President's Award for great customer service.
Hey, welcome back to Izzy's Grill. You're just in time for my teriyaki chicken, marinated for 36 hours, then cooked to a golden brown. Sure, the original recipe was teriyakis, but did she think of adding fresh pineapple? Speaking of grills gone wild, wait till you taste my grilled wild salmon, coated with my special orange glaze and loaded with vitamin E and all kinds of great nutrients. Delicious, nutritious teriyaki chicken and wild Alaskan salmon. It's the real grill deal, only at Izzy's.
Izzy's. Aesthetic Medicine with Dr. Darm, Tuesday at 9 on AM Northwest.
Madam Speaker, just to be clear, you're accusing the CIA of lying to you in September of 2002.
Misleading the Congress of the United States.
And also
misleading the Congress of the United States. The briefing that I received, we were not told that in fact, we were told that waterboarding was not being used. No, I wasn't informed. I was informed that a briefing had taken place. Now, you have to look at what they briefed those members. I was not briefed that. I was only informed that they were briefed, but I did not get the briefing. So yes, I am saying that they are misleading, that the CIA was misleading the Congress.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi under fire, but not backing down one bit in her Thursday press conference. Let me bring our roundtable back in to talk about it. George Will, Liz Cheney, Steve Schmidt, James Carville, and Katrina vanden Heuvel. And George, I love the way that Dan Balz of the Washington Post analyzed this. He said her performance, Speaker's performance in the Capitol, was either a calculated escalation of a long-running feud with the Bush administration or a reckless act by a politician whose word has been called into question.
The Bush administration's gone, and people addicted to attacking it really have to get over that. Her charges are so shrill, so specific, and so grave that they turn something that was arguably advisable, a truth commission, into something that's becoming mandatory to find out whether or not we can trust the CIA. It's a very serious charge she made.
You know, like 7 years ago, the CIA says something. She says, and she and Senator Graham and Senator Rockefeller say something. I don't think that Democrats really want to be at war with the CIA. We had that, you know, before, and that's not particularly productive. I think that she and the CIA director should sit down and they should, as best as we can determine, this is what happened. It was 7 years ago. I'm a little bit like Senator Webb. I mean, we could.
But then why go the extra step and say they lied?
Well, you know what? I love the Speaker. She's a great family lady and everything else. I probably wouldn't have done that. Okay? I just, you know what I mean? If they raise this to the level of some kind of a, she's got to resign or this or that. No, I probably, if I would have been there, I would have probably said, look, I have a very different recollection, or something along those lines. This is something that happened 7 years ago. There's some support that they didn't tell her. There's some support that they did tell her. But she and Leon Panetta are from the same part of the country. They're from the same political party. It seems to me that somebody could sit down and say, this is our version of it or whatever, and we need to get a better way to do this.
But it doesn't look like the Republican Party is going to let that happen.
No, look, I think if you watch that news conference, I think she couldn't have looked worse. Totally not credible. I think what's totally exposed here is her partisan witch hunt against former Bush administration officials. And while I disagree with some of the policies, particularly with regard to waterboarding, sincerely, the Vice President and others sincerely believed these were the policies necessary to keep this country safe, which was kept safe for seven and a half years. And I think the ludicrousness of we're going to try to prosecute, we're going to try to haul people before congressional committees. I mean, you look at those committee hearings on the auto companies, it's inconceivable to me what the circus looks like when we start to investigate the intelligence agencies in a time of war.
Hey, guys, this is about truth and torture. Illegal, immoral, wrong torture. This is not a political football game. I am not here to absolve or condemn Nancy Pelosi. I am saying we need to use this time to get to the truth of what a party in power in 2002, with all the power in the world, did in terms of briefings, insufficient, incomplete briefings on a range of issues, WMDs, 9/11 Commission, Iraq. We need to use that. We need to declassify the briefings material and not cherry pick, as your father, Liz, wishes to do.
But you'd be willing to have that release as well?
He just wants two documents. But we need a truth commission with General Taguba. That is my proposal. The man who ran the Abu Ghraib report. Have a military man oversee and have real power to get to the truth of what we need to do to move forward responsibly, Steve. To bury this will tarnish and undermine and subvert the justice and power of this country.
Katrina, there's absolutely actually no confusion on our side of this issue. On our side of this issue, you know, you can say you agree or you disagree with the policy, but these were policies that kept the country safe. The vice president, as an example, has been very clear in saying, absolutely, I supported these policies. But you let her go, George. You got to let me finish. Yeah, the vice president has been absolutely clear in saying these were the right policies. Now, the people here who seem to be confused are, you know, the Nancy Pelosi's of the world who supported it, but then they didn't support it, or who were really offended by it, but they made no response to it. So I think it's very important here to be clear about what the facts are and, in fact, what happened.
Judge, an absolutely stunning finding, and in line with my book, 40 More Years, we at Democracy Corps asked the American people, sometimes if you want to know an answer, the best thing to do is ask a question. We said, when it comes to national security policy, you think President Obama is doing better, worse, or about the same as President George W. Bush? A very fair question. The results were startling. 50% said President Obama, 25% said President Bush. We're living in a world where twice as many people think that this administration is doing a better job on the signature Republican issue. This is somewhat of a, this represents somewhat, this is, again.
It depends which polls you quote.
Well, no,
You've also got polls, no, but James, there was a Rasmussen poll out there that said that 58% of the American people polled believed that the release of the, I'll show you my polls too, believed that the release of the interrogation memos actually made us less safe. So you can quote a whole range of polls on this question, James.
This is just fact.
That's right. I'm telling you the response to your
twice as many
polls,
people
James.
think that this president, on the question, who's doing a better job of keeping the nation safe? So what is clearly working is that this, quote, offensive, this talk radio offensive that somehow or another Obama is keeping us less safe is blowing up in their face. And I'm all for letting the offense go.
I know you've been in the Seychelles, but what's been going on here in the United States in the last week really bears very little resemblance to what you just said.
I disagree.
Again,
this
last
week has been a coordinated campaign.
In the last week is actually the American people saying, wait a second, we do not want a president who's going to dismantle those things that kept us safe without studying them and thinking about them. And when the White House announces they're going to release pictures and then turns the decision around and says, we're not releasing the pictures, that tells you that the American people who are speaking out are actually having a
Can I repeat this 1 minute? 50% President
in your
Obama,
poll, which poll
25%, this is
So, James, my poll says 58% of the American people actually believe
I want to bring George Will in on this first, then go to Katrina.
Surely the point is smaller than this cosmic question you're talking about, our national safety. It is, did the CIA lie to Congress? And if not, is the Speaker, the third person in line to be President of the United States, is she truthful at this point? Now, Senator McCain was, he says, briefed on waterboarding and vehemently, his word, protested. Jane Harman, who replaced Nancy Pelosi as ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, says she was briefed and wrote a strong letter of protest. Let's find out who is telling the truth, the CIA or the Speaker.
To be fair, Senator Graham, who takes copious notes, says that he wasn't, as did Senator Rockefeller, as did Senator Feinstein. I'm all for it. And it is eminently conceivable that 7 years ago, people have two different memories of a meeting. That's not outside the realm of possibility. I'm a little bit like, but we can, just like we need to find out if torture was used to extract confessions to talk about links between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, of which we know that Al-Qaeda had nothing to do with 9/11.
Can this table agree that we need a commission to investigate the full range of abuse, misuse of intelligence? In addition, what we've seen over this last week, Liz, and we may live in different planets, is a coordinated campaign to distract attention from the true architects of a torture campaign which has made this country less secure. I think that is what millions of Americans have seen, and the polls which show that President Cheney, who has given interviews to compliant... Oh, I'm sorry, I always thought of him as president. Sorry, has given interviews to the compliant media, is now 56 of GOP insiders think he's doing damage to the Republican Party. What does that suggest about the nature of his...
Katrina, I really appreciate your concern for the Republican Party, and I think you and I do live on opposite planets. But I do think that it's the case that the American people, you know, when President Obama first came into office, he was asked, do you agree with Vice President Cheney's advice that you ought to take a long, hard look at these policies and at the intel and what we've learned before you make changes? And he said, I actually do. I agree with that. Then day 2, he comes into office, and he doesn't just change the policy, but he releases to the terrorists, to the enemy, the list of the techniques that we used. So those techniques are now out there in the legal memos. They're out there for the terrorists to train to. Then he comes in and he says, listen, we're going to prosecute potentially people who worked in the Bush administration who worked very hard to keep the nation safe. Now, in my view, that's un-American. That's not something that's ever happened before in this nation.
It's banana republicanism, is
Yeah,
what
but
it is.
he's pretty much taken that off the table, the prosecution.
Yeah, but come on, George, to even suggest it, I don't think he has taken it off the table.
When is democratic accountability banana republicanism?
There were
accountability.
thousands of Americans murdered in Lower Manhattan and across the country by these attacks. Anthrax, the belief that more attacks were imminent. The public officials in the Bush administration who worked to keep this country safe. You may disagree with the policy, but to want to do these prosecutions, to haul people before the congressional circus up here is nonsense. And at the end of the day, the president made the right decision, in my view, to stop the practice of waterboarding. Absolutely. There are profound issues facing this country. We ought to move forward, not look backward. There is an obsession on the left with get Bush, get Cheney, get Bush administration officials. The Democrats now run this city, and they should leave it in the past.
I want to go to the politics just a little bit, because Katrina talked about that National Journal Insiders poll where 57% of Republicans say they don't think it's helpful. I know you probably believe what your father is doing is helpful, obviously, but I wanted to get Steve, as John McCain's former campaign manager. I know a lot of your former colleagues, Republican operatives, think it's not that helpful to have a former vice president coming out this early in this way.
It doesn't matter. Dick Cheney will never be on a ballot again for national office. What you've seen him be able to do, though, is to put great attention onto an issue and to impact this issue in a very marked way over the last week. The party doesn't have a leader right now, and the party's not going to have a leader until we have a nominee. And so there's a lot of voices in the party, and I think he's been a voice in this country on issues since the late 1960s, and he has every right to speak out.
I don't have a problem. He's the former vice president. He wants to go out, he can speak all that he wants to. Just like Rush Limbaugh can speak all that he wants to. There is a debate in the Republican Party. I think it is a good debate in the vice president, Rush Limbaugh. But Rush Limbaugh says we ought to kick John McCain and Meghan McCain out the party. Good riddance to Specter. I'm sure it's going to be Monday. It's going to be good riddance to Huntsman. I think it is healthy for the country for the vice president to be out there. I'm all for this. I don't have an objection to it at all.
George, he's brought a smile to your face.
I'll bet you are. It is campaigning 101 to define your opponent, and your side thinks it is advantageous to define the opposition party as Dick Cheney. Pro-Cheney, anti-Cheney doesn't matter, because a rising generation of new Republicans are coming along, and by the time we get into another election, they're going to be the story.
Yet one member of that rising generation, John Huntsman, has decided he's going to join Obama's team.
Sent to China, and that may be a tribute from the Obama administration to the political potential of Mr. Huntsman. I don't know. He also speaks Mandarin Chinese. He'd be a good ambassador.
I'd like to say something about the next generation of Republicans. Look, it seems to me that, our opponents like to spend a lot of time talking about who's up and who's down. The future of the Republican Party is going to be built based on substance, and a key part of that substance is a strong national defense. And what you see all across the country today, frankly, are the rise of conservative groups, people who say, I'm not Republican, I'm not Democratic, but I'm conservative. And they've got a set of core beliefs: strong national defense, belief in the Second Amendment, individual liberties, low taxes, limited government. Those are the things that this party has long stood for and that made America great. The national security piece of it is one on which the Vice President has, in fact, been very effective in the debate over the course of the last 2 weeks, not just in influencing public opinion, but frankly in influencing the Obama White House. So I think, it's great for me to sort of hear James and Katrina talk about, where they think the party's going. In fact, I think that the Republican Party has got to stay true to those core principles. And when it does, I think we'll be back to winning elections again.
I certainly respect your father's right to go out and speak to the nation. I think those who disagreed with that have a kind of royalist mentality, that the Vice President should disappear. I think two of the great speakers of our time have been Vice President Gore and ex-President Jimmy Carter. However, what he's doing, it seems to me, is a kind of political suicide mission for the Republican Party, with the Republican Party as his collateral damage. You talk about an evolving generation. That generation will find it harder, in my view, if the party's so allied with a failed and disastrous Bush-Cheney administration.
Katrina, that's just not
my
fair.
last point is I do think there's energy in the Republican Party in an interesting area, which is libertarianism. George will smile or not, but I do think Ron Paul is not the right messenger. But it was surprising that before Obama took off, that a lot of young people found in Ron Paul's message, again, not the right messenger. But that's where you may see the strength. On the other hand, the demographic shifts in this country speak to what Steve Schmidt spoke to when he spoke in defense of gay marriage and the need for a party to accommodate and be a big tent and not self-marginalize, which it has done.
Give me time to respond to this. Look, at the end of the day, what the Vice President's doing is not about politics. And it's fascinating and interesting for all of us who care about politics to make these analyses. At the end of the day, what he's doing is standing up because he believes that this country is less safe if we dismantle these policies, and because he believes it's wrong for an administration to come in and prosecute
He doesn't care
people
about
that
it,
he
but do you
disagreed
believe
with.
it's helping the Republican Party?
Absolutely.
Right.
No question.
George alluded to the next generation, and the generation coming up, the Republicans, that will be all 32% of the young generation. The big problem that the party faces, and that's one of the reasons, I think, that people want to, 66 to 32 voted Obama over McCain in this election. That was, even John Kerry carried younger voters. As these younger voters come through the system, the Republican Party is going to have to think of a way, I think, that they will, to address these voters and these concerns. Right now, they're not doing it. And therefore, as a Democrat, I wouldn't, and wouldn't be any good, but I don't think anything that this Vice President's going to say, maybe he doesn't think it's political, but if you're a former Vice President and you attack an incumbent president, it is by its nature political.
The secret of the Republican revival are the seeds sown by Democratic policies, inflation and all the rest. And I suggest that one day, 40 more years will be a title as memorable as the book titled Dow 36,000.
That's possible. The good thing about it, George, you and I won't be here. We won't be here to
We've got a couple minutes left, and I want to, as George is selling your book for you, I want to talk about the president today. He's going to be going to Notre Dame, facing a lot of protest on campus, George, from those who say he shouldn't be honored in this way by a Catholic institution.
Well, the wrong principle is to say that whenever a speaker speaks at a university, the university is necessarily endorsing what he says or what he stands for. No one wants that. On the other hand, the question is not what Mr. Obama will say today, but what Notre Dame says by inviting him. It goes against the guidance issued in 2004 by the bishops, reaffirmed this week by the protests from Cardinal George of Chicago and Cardinal Dolan of New York, saying that on a matter this important, on abortion, it is wrong for a Catholic university to muddy its message because inviting the president suggests that the issue is not all that important.
I think that if it is that important, and I'm not the best Catholic in the world, but I consider myself a Catholic, what they need to do is get the faculty and make sure, like say, a constitutional law teacher that would teach that Roe v. Wade is settled law, then that person's got to go. I mean, that's much more of an effect than anything like that. I also found it interesting that the valedictorian, a young woman that's going to Harvard Medical School, said that she voted for Obama, that she was completely and didn't agree with him on the abortion issue. But if Notre Dame wants to get serious about this, I think they can go down and find. I bet you there are a lot of pro-choice faculty members that might even be some that are in law school and find out who these people are doing.
Well, as a Catholic, I agree with James completely on this. It always drove me nuts when President Bush was in office and he was invited to a commencement speech. And I'll defend the right of anyone to protest in this country, absolutely, on anything. But I think we do too much turning our back to each other in this country. He's the President of the United States, and that's an office that ought to be treated with respect. The university invited him, and I think he ought to be able to go and say his piece and